I'm Barbara Fisher. I'm the Director-Curator of the Art Museum here at the University of Toronto, and it's a huge pleasure to welcome you all. It's with humility that I wish to acknowledge the land on which the University of Toronto operates for tens of thousands of years, with the archaeological record going ever deeper into the past as we read almost weekly. This land has been cared for and taken and been stewarded by Indigenous people, and most recently the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, Petun First Nations, and Mississaugas of the Credit. Today it continues to be the home and meeting place for Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, including Métis and Inuit. And on behalf of all of us here at the Art Museum, I wish to express our deep gratitude to be able to live, work, breathe, and walk on this land. While it is only ever a humble contribution, the Art Museum seeks to honor our indebtedness to the land and its living histories by way of our deep commitment in all of our programs and exhibitions to acknowledge and redress the violent and colonial histories of the land, and more importantly, to foster, support, and build the present and possible futures in ways that are non-colonial and in respect of the land and all its relations. Tonight's keynote lecture is a part of a series of events beautifully curated by Bushra Junaid with the support of our curator of programs, Drea Asibe, who recently joined the Art Museum, as well as huge support by Melody Liu, who is organizing and putting everything together behind the scenes and just crafting the audiovisual and its workings. And everything else about registrations. So the keynote lectures, of course, and the series of programs that Bushra has put together is prompted by Camille's first major museum solo exhibition, Otherworld, which takes visitors along her Afronautic travels from a liberated future to the archive and Canada's entanglement in the transatlantic slave trade. Closely allied with Camille's work for many years, Bushra Junaid explores history, memory, cultural identity, and placemaking through her own art practice and her landmark curatorial project that took place in Newfoundland in 2020, I believe, called What Carries Us, Newfoundland and Labrador in the Black Atlantic, which was hosted at the Rooms in Newfoundland. It included Camille's work, among many other artists and historical objects, to reckon with Canadian history at the crossroads of the movement of ships, goods, sugar, rum, and enslaved people in the triangle trade. Bushra's book, The Possible Lives of W.H. Saylor, was a finalist for the 2022 Next Generation Indie Book Awards. Before passing the mic on to Bushra, who will introduce Camille, I would like to thank the Art Museum team, Drea, Melody, as I already mentioned, but also our funders, the Canada Council for the Arts, the Toronto Arts Council, Ontario Arts Council. We're incredibly grateful. And additionally, I wish to acknowledge Karen Carter, who supported this project in particular, and the City of Toronto's History Museums, which is a network of 10 historic sites owned and operated by the City of Toronto. So without further ado, Bushra, welcome to the podium. And,
thank you. Welcome, everyone. Thank you, Barbara, for inviting me to guest curate this A Journey Through Otherworld, a symposium in response to Camille's incredible, breathtaking Otherworld exhibition. I want to just reiterate the thanks to Drea Asibe, curator of programs, who has worked incredibly hard and joyfully to support this program. A thank you to Noah Bronstein, Melody Liu, Marian Raylan, and all the staff who have at U of T supported the program logistically in terms of communications and in so many other ways. Once again, I want to thank Karen Carter, Director of Museums at the City of Toronto, for her leadership and ability to move mountains. And thank you to the many artists and scholars who have and will participate in A Journey Through Otherworld. And now I'd just like to take a moment to thank my late father, Ayodele Junaid, Yoruba of Lagos, Nigeria, my dear aged mother, Adassa Gabadin Junaid of Dumbarton, St. Anne, Jamaica, the daughter of Letha Lynch and Ivan Gabadin, the granddaughter of Sarah Ann Lynch, the great-granddaughter of Mary Gale, a descendant of Sissa, who I understand made the Middle Passage as an adolescent, and to those ancestors known and unknown. And now it is my distinct pleasure to introduce my dear sister, friend, artist, scholar, Camille Turner, who will offer this public keynote that sets out the central themes and research methodology of her artistic practice and the interdisciplinary visual and sonic artworks presented in her Other Life exhibition. I was going to say read a lot from your bio, but I want to give you the space and the time. But Camille is a graduate of OCAD University and has a PhD from York University's Faculty of Environmental and Urban Change, and a provost postdoctoral fellowship from the University of Toronto's Daniels Faculty of Architecture and Landscape Design. She is a recipient of the 2022 Artist Prize by the Toronto Biennial of Art. Her artworks are held in museum and public and private collections, including the National Gallery of Canada, Art Museum of University of Toronto, Art Gallery of Hamilton, Art Gallery of Nova Scotia, the Canada Council Art Bank, the Royal Bank of Canada, Museum London, the Wedge Collection, the Rooms, and the McMichael Canadian Art Collection. Please join me to welcome Camille and to send her love and blessings in this, her birthday week. May the ancestors guide her voice, thoughts, and words. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, everybody, for being here. And thank you, Bushra. I feel like this has been such a beautiful cornucopia of just delicious things and all my favorite people. So this is a huge gift. So thank you so much. Thank you, Drea, as well, for all of your incredible support. Melody. Thank you, Barbara, for curating this exhibition and all of the incredible, the incredible journey of making it, for sharing that. Yeah. And to all the staff of the Art Museum, it's been really wonderful. And also just a special shout out to my collaborators, Kamal Pirbai, the Outer Region Collective that includes my brother and sister, Karen Turner and Lee Turner, and guest as well. Pixel Heller is here, who is an Afronaut. So thank you so much. So I'm gonna start by posing a question. What if the past is not past? What if what was still lingers in the present, shaping our lives, without our knowledge, without our consent? In such a present past, we reap the results of what was set in motion long before we were born. Oops. But are we doomed to be pawns of this past? Or can we break free to create a liberated future? So much of what has happened has been silenced, ignored, overwritten, and buried. So how do we recover the past and reckon with it, reckon with what we find? Because I think that only then can we actually understand the crazy world that's around us and in the present. And only after we've repaired what we can repair and we can consciously chart a course to a new future. So as an artist, I try to contribute to this effort by using my artworks to bring attention to stories that have been silenced. And I call what I do an Afronautic methodology, an Afronautic research methodology. Now the suffix nautic refers to journeys that traverse, disrupt, and conflate time, space, land, and water. And it emphasizes navigation, ships, sailing, and the ocean. And the ocean was the primary stage where products such as rum, sugar, cotton, and salt, which were made by the unfree labor of trafficked Africans, was exchanged. And my work is dedicated to the ancestors. They speak to me in dreams. They guided me across the Atlantic to the door of no return on Gorée Island off the coast of Dakar, Senegal. They led me back across the water to Newfoundland, where I encountered the same stories hiding in what seemed like an innocent landscape. And my experiences led me to create the body of work that you see as Otherworld. And I think about Otherworld as a meeting place. I think about it as a place where we can gain insights into the past, we can shed light on the present, and we can dream new futures. So tonight I'm going to share my journey of creating Otherworld with you. So this is basically the foundation of the Afronautic methodology. So, this is what I draw on in the making of the work. So in this methodology, blackness is centered and time is conceptualized as nonlinear. And I pay attention to what has been silenced. Also, I'm using imagination as a tool for world making. So this piece is Portals, and it's literally a map of the journey. So it's a series of 19 large-scale images that are printed on fabric. And this was part of the commission by University of Toronto Art Museum. And each image tells us tells the story of part of the journey. So my journey began the first time I traveled to Senegal, and Nina Zegladi's here. She was on that journey. So this was 2004. I was invited to speak at the Dakar Biennial in Senegal. And while I was there, I traveled to Gorée Island for the first time. And I visited the door of no return. This is the place that Dion Brand describes as real, imaginary, and imagined. This is a door out of which Africans were captured and loaded into ships headed for the New World, never to see their loved ones again. There were dozens of doors like this door that dot the coast of West Africa. They were built by European traders as holding cells. So this is where captured African adults and children were incarcerated. On that first visit, I felt rage, I felt despair, I felt confusion. I had no vessel to hold the emotions that I experienced. So the journey continued, and it took me a while to even realize that I was actually on a journey. So the journey continued in 2010 when I moved into the Grange neighborhood. So basically this neighborhood here and all the way south to Queen Street. I learned through Afua Cooper, historian, that people of African descent had lived in this area 200 years before me. And I was surprised to find out that some of these people, like Peggy Pompadour and her children, had been enslaved here. So in In 2013, I made an audio walk telling the story of Peggy Pompadour through a character I created called Gloria Smith. Now, Gloria is a young Black Canadian woman who is an inadvertent time traveler. That is, she can't control her time travels. She travels through time against her will. And on one of her time travels, this was initiated when her mother took her to the King Edward Hotel, which is a posh hotel. I think it's on King Street. As she walked through the revolving doors, so she walks through the revolving doors, and she faints. And she wakes up in the 19th century in a jail cell with Peggy Pompadour. Now, Peggy is shocked to see someone from our time tumbling into her world. And so the two women speak, and Gloria learns from Peggy that slavery was alive and well in the town of York, which later became the city of Toronto. Now, Peggy had been thrown in jail by Peter Russell, who was the administrator of Upper Canada. And Russell had claimed Peggy and her children as his property. Russell had Peggy jailed for the crime of resisting slavery. Now, when Gloria comes to, she returns to our time. She visits the archive in search of Peggy, and she finds these records. So you can see the one on the right. It's from 1803 from the Upper Canada Gazette. It's an ad that Russell placed declaring that Peggy was his property and nobody can claim her because she had resisted by running away. And the one on the left, that's from 1806, and it's an ad placed in the Upper Canada Gazette selling Peggy and one of her children. Now, the jail was, as I found out through the archival records, was exactly where the King Edward Hotel is today. So the journey continued in 2014 when I received the Chalmers grant, which brought me back to Senegal. That's 10 years after my initial visit. And my mission this time was to think about the future. I wanted to learn about Afrofuturism, because I'm always drawing on Afrofuturism. So I wanted to know the roots that I'm drawing on. But while I was there, I visited the door of no return, yet again, and again, and again. It was as if I couldn't resist its pull into the past. And Brand explains, the door casts a haunting spell on personal and collective consciousness in the diaspora. So to try to get away from the door and back to thinking about the future, I decided to travel to Saint Louis, which is a beautiful UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's about 5 hours north of Dakar. Saint Louis is known in Wolof, which is the most common indigenous language there in that area, as Ndar. And this town is full of colonial buildings like this one. There's this crumbly, pastel-y feel to everything, and it felt like I was walking through a dream. But on my second day in Ndar, I went on an architectural walking tour, and the very first stop was this house, and the guide said, "This house belonged to a young French couple. They were traders, the first traders in the area. Many others followed." And then the guide took us to the basement. So these are two of the pieces that you saw in Portals. And the basement was just so dark and dank, and it had an acrid smell. And as we were standing in the room, he said, "They traded in gum arabic, palm oil, and enslaved people. And by the way, you're standing in the place where the enslaved people were?" And I didn't even hear another word. It was as if I fell backwards in time, and I found myself surrounded by terrified people huddled on the dirt floor, their eyes drinking me in. And I realized that I must have appeared as a ghost, the way Gloria Smith appeared to Peggy Pompadour in that jail cell. Anyway, I imagined Gloria's rage at the thought that 12 million people would face the violence of being abducted from their homelands, placed in cells like this one, and trafficked across the ocean in the holds of ships. So I imagined her thinking that since she was a time traveler, she had the power to do something about it. So I imagine her thinking that she could save these people by traveling back in time and stopping the trade. So I got to work. I started writing a film about Gloria Smith and her mission. But what emerged from my writing was really startling. Instead of traveling back to the past, all of a sudden in my writing, Gloria was traveling to the future. She breached time-space and found herself on a spaceship that belonged to African space travelers. Now, her time travels made her so exhausted that she couldn't even talk when she got there. She could barely keep her eyes open. But there was no need because the astronauts, they could read her mind. They knew all about her mission. They knew that Gloria was there to ask for their help. But here's the dilemma. If they helped her by traveling back in time and preventing the transatlantic trade in Africans from happening, they would save millions of their ancestors, but the world as we know it now would cease to exist. And so would they. And so would Gloria. So this became the film Awakening. This is the very first piece that you see when you walk into Otherworld.
Warning, security breach, intruder alert. 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 Warning, security breach.
That will be all, computer. Thank you.
You know who this is, don't you?
Who?
Gloria Smith.
The Gloria Smith? The time traveler?
Yeah, the rebel queen herself.
How did she get here?
I don't know. She managed to cross the time barrier.
That isn't supposed to happen. What do you think it means?
There's something important going on. I mean, I don't think she'd be allowed to travel to the future for no reason.
But we travel to the past all the time. How come we can go there, but they can't come here?
I don't know. I guess it messes up the storytellers. Anyway, we're not allowed to change anything. That's the sacred rule.
Well, I want to know why she's here.
No, let her sleep. She's exhausted.
Whoa, hey, you okay? No, don't try to get up. Shh. Rest. You're safe here. Rest. Shh. God, she's so scared.
Yeah, she's exhausted.
This isn't gonna be easy calming her down. She needs to rest.
Let's give her some relaxer.
Good idea.
Whew, that was intense. At least now we know what she's up to. She really needs our help.
Yeah, but what she's proposing won't just change the past. If she succeeds, everything we worked so hard for will disappear. We've got to stop her.
How could we justify stopping her? She's trying to prevent millions of our ancestors from being stolen.
But we'll all die.
You think she cares about that?
I don't know. I don't want to die. Do you?
No. Look, we left Earth because we didn't want to live in a world where our people are exploited. I think we should help Gloria.
But what about the sacred rule? This will change everything.
So before I left Senegal in 2014, I returned once more to the door of no return on Gorée Island. This is the most western point of West Africa. And as I looked out from the door across the ocean, I felt as if someone was on the other side of the ocean, staring at me through another door. Well, 2 years later, I was invited by Bushra Junaid and Pamela Edmonds to take part in an exhibition they curated at Eastern Edge called Newfound Lands. So this is in Newfoundland. And the show explored the links between the Caribbean and Newfoundland. And while I was in Newfoundland, I traveled to Cape Spear, the most eastern point of North America. While I was there, I was drawn to a battery carved into the rock. And I looked across the ocean from the door of that battery, and I realized, as I was looking through that door, I realized that the person that had been looking back at me from the other side of the ocean was me. So I've come to think of this mission as the haunting of ancestors who've been waiting for me to tell their story. And this is a story in which I'm implicated and through which I came into being. So for the Newfoundlands exhibition, Bushra, who is of Caribbean and African ancestry, shared her research with me. And this is one of the most stunning documents that I'd ever seen at that time. It was a letter written to James Rogers from the owner of a ship constructed in Newfoundland called the Sarah. Now, this letter was written by John Fowler, and he was a sales agent. I was stunned to find out that the Sarah was a slave ship. And in 2019, I was invited back to Newfoundland to participate in the Buena Vista Biennial, and I decided to focus my attention on the slave ship Sarah. So I came 10 days early to make this artwork about the Sarah, the slave ship. But Winston James, who's my husband, who's over here, at the time, he came with me to Newfoundland, and he had suggested that I look in the Slave Voyages database to see if there's any more ships. I didn't expect to find any more ships. I mean, it's Newfoundland, right? Well, I was astonished to see that it wasn't just the Sarah that was built in Newfoundland. There were 19 more ships built. There were 19 ships built for the transatlantic trade in Newfoundland. There were others that were built for the intra-American trade, which meant trading between Caribbean islands. And also all along the coast of what became Canada, there were 42 ships built for the transatlantic trade. So that was the opening up into a whole other world for me. So the early texts describe the abundance of trees and the great stands of pine lining the shores of the island, right down to the water. And when the European explorer John Cabot landed in Newfoundland in 1497, there was such an abundance of cod that he could hardly get his boat close to the shore. But after just 2 generations of colonization, the fish and the forests were gone. Trees were cut down to build flakes, boats, barrels, homes, and stages. The Beothuk, one of the island's indigenous nations, had retreated into the interior forest to avoid the often deadly encounters with colonizers. But the invaders also pressed into the forests, harvesting trees to feed their growing fishing industry. So with the violent encroachment on their land, there was no place for the Beothuk to retreat to. The Beothuk nation was declared extinct by the mid-1800s. And after the trees were devoured, the land became scarred and barren. Auk, fox, otter, and mink disappeared. A deep and haunting silence obscures the genocide and ecocide that took place here. So I followed this silence. I listened for the whispers of ghosts, and I paid attention to my feeling of being haunted. And Vivian Salehana argues that ghosts remain because justice has not been achieved. So as I attuned myself to what this silence was covering, a character began to emerge. This character began to emerge. So I had this white jumpsuit with me, and I covered my hair with a white head wrap, and I put silver boot liners on my feet, and I wore fisherman's gloves with the fingers cut off. And the effect was ghostly and otherworldly. And the character came from the future, bearing a rock that she found in West Africa. When the ships were built, they were built as displacement vessels. That is, they were built to carry a load. But in the absence of the load, they had to be weighted down with whatever was heavy from the local area. In this case, rocks in Newfoundland. So this rock made its way from Newfoundland on a slave ship built on these shores. And this character brought the rock home as a witness to tell the story of these crimes. And so this piece here became the Afronautic Research Lab Newfoundland. Now the following year was 2020. And as we know, the world was on lockdown. And at that time, I was still living in an apartment in Toronto, and Winston was living in California. On May 25, 2020, George Floyd was brutally murdered, lynched in plain view. I felt exhausted. I felt alone. I just wanted to curl up, and as Tupac says, wake me up when I'm free. I thought if what if black people left Earth? Because clearly Earth has become unlivable for black life. But then the response, the protests all around the world made me hopeful. And I thought, okay, this is not the time to sleep. Let me get busy. And so this is when the dream started. It was as if someone was whispering in my ear, and I'd wake up with storyboards in my head. And so I faithfully just drew whatever I dreamt about. And this film, Sarah, emerged. And I feel like it created itself. The film's name came from the slave ship Sarah. And this is a ship that was built in 1788 in Newfoundland. And in the film, a researcher performed by me was researching the Sarah. And as she does so, her research, she's bombarded by reports on social media of brutal killings of black people, which is exactly what was going on. The film is narrated by an astronaut who arrives from the future to find out why their ancestors left Earth in the 21st century. They weren't told. They were not told what happened because the elders thought, well, let's give everybody a new chance. We're a new people. Let's just move forward. Let's erase the past. Let's just go forward, right? But nobody could account for the dreams. So they wanted to know what happened in the past. So interestingly enough, while I was writing the script for the film, the Pentagon surreptitiously released a report about UFO sightings. You might remember that. So that was perfect. There, I had the perfect spaceship for my astronaut. So the astronaut observes the violence of the present and the crimes of the past. And they're shocked to learn that millions of people had been abducted from their homelands. And those who committed the crime were still unpunished. So that became the film Sarah. The Astronautic Research Lab is this piece here with all of the archival materials. And it's traveled to sites all across the country and gathering and sharing knowledge wherever it goes. It's animated by Outer Region, the Astronautic Performance Collective. And that consists of myself, my siblings, and sometimes guest astronauts like Pixel. The project was first presented as part of the showroom exhibition right here, actually just down the hall, in 2016. And it emerged from my teaching here at U of T. I used to teach at New College, a program called New One. And each year I'd bring my students into the archive to look at 18th century Canadian newspapers. I would just basically give them the name and date of a newspaper and show them how to use the microfiche. So they would be finding people for sale amongst the goods and services. And they would find people that were criminalized for stealing themselves. So I didn't even have to teach that class. It just provoked critical thinking. It enabled students to see a different Canada. It allowed students to see through different eyes, and I wanted the public to have this opportunity. So that's what the Astronautic Research Lab came out of. So the lab consists of all kinds of silenced and suppressed archival documents. At first, the documents only referenced slavery in Canada, but then I just kind of kept building it out to include the legacies, the present-day ongoing legacies. And historian Natasha Henry, for the Otherworld exhibition, has created an amazing resource, teaching resource that educators can use to accompany the lab. And then we, as the astronauts, we do Astronautic Research Lab workshops to animate the lab. And thank you to everybody who's participated. The last lab was pretty amazing. So many people came. It was great. So in 2021, During the pandemic, my friend and collaborator Kamal Pirbai and I made rocks. And this is a series of 9 images. We first made 3, and then later on we made 6 more for this exhibition. And my good friend Cheryl Lerondel told me that in the Cree language, rocks, or asine, are slow-moving grandparents. So Kamal and I imagined the rocks as storytellers who witnessed and store the past. So this series of images present people attuning themselves to rocks and learning what the rocks remember. And in 2022, I was commissioned by the Toronto Biennial to create Nave. And while I was making this artwork, I attended an event, I think it was called The Door of No Return at 20. And so Dion Brand explained that when she had written the book, The Door of No Return, she hadn't actually visited the Door of No Return yet. It was later on that she visited the door. And that was when she wrote, and well, she didn't say this, but she wrote a poem, Verso 55 in the Blue Clerk. And it's basically about that encounter. I cannot read that poem without weeping. It is one of the most beautiful poems I've ever read. So she presents her journey as a pilgrimage to the Door of No Return to honor her ancestors. So I was in the process of making Nave at that time, and when I heard her tell that story, that's when the penny dropped for me. It's like, oh my goodness, so that's what I'm doing. I am staging an encounter, a similar encounter, but into the hold of a ship. And so the reason why I use that, the name Nave, right, is because some of Newfoundland's first churches were built by shipwrights. They were the first builders of the town. So if you look up into the naves of these churches that they built, it's like looking down into the hold of a ship. So I basically decided to flip the nave of a church, to use it as a container for Black memory. And so the time traveler makes her, that you saw in Afronautic Research Lab Newfoundland, makes her way into the nave. She arrives from the future to perform a ceremony to honor those who endured the Middle Passage. And then Émilie Jabouin, who, is Emily still here? She was a performer in this piece. And she performs an ancestral figure who emerges from the water, and she's offering a song and dance. And it's a song of victory, basically, and she's drawing the inspiration from Brand. The nave becomes a space, a transcendent space. So I returned to Newfoundland in 2023. I wasn't able to go during the pandemic. I didn't get to return until 2023. And that's where I started, I wanted to think about the ocean, to have a conversation with the ocean, to learn what the ocean remembered. So I sat with the ocean, and I wanted to bring into memory the sacred lives of the 5,798 people that were abducted from their homelands and carried in the holds of the ships that were constructed on that island. 740 of those people died en route from Africa, West Africa, to the Caribbean. And So yeah, for me, this is a very personal story. You know, my ancestors were carried on ships like those, on these routes, and perhaps on these very ships. There's no way for me to know. So I treat everyone that I see in the archive as an ancestor. So this performance for me was one of mourning. And yeah, I gathered the materials. I gathered whatever the ocean brought me. And I used them to construct these memorials, these pieces that you see on the table there. And yeah, and so the installations that I created and the film together, I call it Sticks and Bones. And then the next piece I want to talk very briefly about is called Maria. And Maria was also a slave ship that was constructed in Newfoundland. It was a 50-ton schooner, and if you know ships, that's not a big ship. But of the 80 captives that it carried, 75 were children. And according to Paul Lovejoy, towards the end of the slave trade, they were packing more and more children, smaller bodies, so that they could carry more people. So what I wanted to do is to think about the lives that were torn apart by this crime that's yet to be reckoned with. So I used the voices of 3 people who had been stolen from their families as children. So Olado Ekpiano, who was stolen at 11 years old from what is now Nigeria. Mary Prince, who was 12 when she was forcefully taken from her family in Bermuda and brought to Turks and Caicos. And she became a salt miner there. And then Sophia Berthen, who was 7 years old when she and her sister were stolen from her parents in Fishkill, New York, and brought into what is now Ontario. Basically, she grew up right where I grew up. So in this piece there are 4 generations of hands reaching towards each other. The youngest is 3. The eldest is almost 90. The eldest was my mom. So with the voices and the hands. And I wanted to say one of the joys of doing this work is working with the people that I get to work with and the conversations that we have. It's been such a beautiful experience. There's so many rich conversations, and I feel like what goes into the work is just as important to me as what you see on the other end. But I feel like what you see on the other end, you can feel what went into the work, and so it's been an incredible journey. So the last piece that I want to talk about is called Fly, and this was also a commission at University of Toronto Art Museum. Now Fly emerged from my engagement with the story of people who were imprisoned in the slave ship, the Fly. It was constructed in 1781 in Newfoundland, and while it was anchored off the coast of West Africa, Africans on the shore liberated those inside the hold. So I thought it was so interesting that it was called the Fly. So I drew on the stories of flying Africans that is in the diaspora in many different forms. It came from an account of a slave ship that landed off the coast of Georgia, and those imprisoned within were chained together, and they were forced to walk out of the ship towards the land. But instead, they turned back and walked into the water en masse. Some say they walked all the way to Africa on the bottom of the ocean, and some say they flew. So in this film, people raise their arms and they fly. And this is the last thing that I want to say. This is not in this show. This is my new work. I just came back from Jamaica, where I had the pleasure of working with my dad to tell his story. It's a project called Worthy. And my dad was born on the Worthy Park estate in St. Catharines. But it wasn't until I held a book in my hands called Searching for the Invisible Man that I realized that Worthy Park had been a former slave plantation. Now this place is now the largest, amongst the largest rum producers, and it is the oldest continuously operating rum producer on the island. So we took a tour of their production. The word slavery wasn't even mentioned. So this project ties in with my previous work, and it really shows me how closely tied slavery is to my own history. My father's great-grandmother was alive when he was born. I think she died when he was 6. She was 18 years old when slavery was abolished, and he talked about how, all the adults around him, the elders around him, their parents had been enslaved. So this was something that was so present in this, in this place. I'm just gonna play this, a little bit of the behind the scenes video that Pixel took while we were in Jamaica. First time anyone's hearing this. So here we go. Here we are on the Worthy Park estate. This is the place where my father was born. When he was 9 years old, he remembers the community being asked to leave. They were thrown out of this place that his father had built. All of the people in this area had built homes. There was a community here. They had to pay rent for the land. They weren't allowed to own the land. Dad remembers walking across cow pastures with all their worldly possessions on their heads. We're here, and it's really been an incredible trip so far. Being in these places that I've heard my dad talk about all my life. We had a tour of the estate. We had a tour of the rum production. That was interesting. The thing that really got me was learning about the yeasts that ferment the rum. These yeasts are cultured from centuries ago. So I find it really captivating, creepy, and interesting that back in the days of slavery, these yeasts were alive, and they're alive today. There's always someone left to tell the story. And I think these yeasts have a really important story to tell. I'm excited to think about this and see where that leads. Thank you.